Bruno and I are going to be discussing consultative committees. You may have heard of that term, or you might not have. It is one of the questions that keep coming up in the workplaces when we go and visit schools, and that's why we thought we would do a question and answer type session. So one of the first questions is...
What's a consultative committee, really?
What is a consultative committee? So a consultative committee is a forum. It's a series of meetings that happen throughout the year, and it's a formal meeting, so there should be minutes and agendas published for the sake of transparency and accountability. But essentially, at the meeting, employees have an opportunity to discuss changes that they would like to make in the workplace, improvements and things like that. But it's not just for employees. The employer also sits at the committee, and they can also put forward items for the agenda that they would like to have considered.
So some consultative committees, some enterprise agreements already have in them what a consultative committee should be talking about. If the enterprise agreement is silent on it, the consultative committee certainly can discuss issues such as improving policies and procedures, or improving how work is actually undertaken in the school, or when work is undertaken in the school. The employer can also bring to the table and sort of say, hey, listen, we want to introduce a new dress code, for example, and that would be a starting point at the consultative committee to have that discussion about what that might look like.
So Bruno, what kinds of things should not be considered at a consultative committee meeting?
Okay, individual grievances that individual teachers or ESOs or ground staff, anybody else in the school have that want to talk about, that should not be raised at a consultative committee. That's something the individual needs to go and discuss with their employer or find another avenue. The consultative committee really talks about general stuff and stuff that really impacts most people, and it's not about seeking an individual workplace right for an individual or a small group of individuals.
Okay, got it.
So how do you get things onto the consultative committee agenda, Priscilla?
Well, that's a good question too, and it often comes up. How is the agenda formed? Well, the school should have a process whereby staff, as in employees, can submit agenda items for discussion and consideration, and usually it's done by email, or there might be issues raised by employees to the representatives who sit on the committee. Often what happens is, before a consultative committee meeting takes place, the employees will meet together as a group. Maybe they take over a portion of a staff meeting by agreement with the school leadership. So they have a 15-20 minute, half an hour discussion where they can talk about the agenda that they want to have put on to the next consultative committee meeting, and then the representatives will inform the school leadership or whoever is chairing that meeting what those agenda items are.
So Priscilla, what constitutes and who sits on a consultative committee?
Well, who sits on a consultative committee is often outlined in an enterprise agreement. And so the enterprise agreement often has a set of clauses in there that outline who sits on the committee. So the number of staff representatives and the number of employer representatives. Usually it's equal, so that there's not a power differential. Often by default, the IAU representative or representatives will be on the consultative committee. But if it doesn't state in your enterprise agreement, then it's a matter for discussion when the committee is getting established at the beginning of the school year, for example, who will be on the consultative committee. Given that consultative committees are advisory in nature to the principal, how is it that decisions actually get made?
Okay, so once the consultative committee have got their agenda, they take those items to discussion, and they come up with a position at the end of that discussion. It's usually good to have a resolution as well. So if you've got a problem, come up with an answer to that problem. Then that gets put to the principal or school management, or principal might nominate somebody, and it's up to them to either accept or reject that deliberation or that change. Now, normally if it's rejected, the principal will let them know, and then if it's accepted, it will just be incorporated into the operations of the school, and off they go. So Priscilla, how does a consultative committee gets set up?
Well, it's often the case, Bruno, that consultative committee clauses are set out in the enterprise agreement and they speak to how one should operate. So it's often the case that consultative committees should be taking place at least once per term, and often that they are set up at the beginning of the year. Now, the process of them getting set up may or may not be mentioned in the enterprise agreement. Usually a ballot needs to be undertaken if there's nominations called for and there's more nominees for positions on the committee, then therefore the ballot would need to take place. But if you have nominees and they match the number of positions on the committee, then a ballot wouldn't necessarily need to take place, because those nominees by default will then be the representatives that go onto the committee. In addition, the IEU representative is often by default automatically on the committee. However, if your enterprise agreement doesn't speak to consultative committee clauses, so to speak, then it might be a process of having that discussion with your school principal and asking, can we have a consultative committee as a mechanism whereby employees can ask for changes to be made to try and make improvements to the way that they do their work, and then it will be up to the principal's discretion as to whether or not that will be approved. And if it is, then again it's about a discussion with the principal as to how often the consultative committee will run, maybe once per term, because that seems to be the standard, but it's the minimum of once per term. They can be more.
Yep. Okay. So Priscilla, who would end up chairing a consultative committee meeting?
Well, because the person who chairs the meeting, they essentially have authorisation over the way the meeting is conducted. It's a position of leadership and power in that meeting, and so because of that reason it's important that the chair position alternates between an employee representative and the employer representatives on that committee. Having said that, it might be the case that everyone at the committee agrees that the leadership representatives will chair if that's satisfactory to the employees, but it's often written into enterprise agreements that the chair will alternate. So how can the IEU SA help in setting up and the running of consultative committees in our schools?
Okay, the easiest thing is to contact the IEU. One of the organisers will come out to your school and have a chat with you about setting up a consultative committee. We'll have a look at the enterprise agreement. If it's in the enterprise agreement, not a problem. They can't not have one. It has to happen. If it's not in the enterprise agreement, certainly we can do two things. One, start the engagement and start the discussion about getting one going. And secondly, when the enterprise agreement does come up for negotiations, seek to put that on the table as a claim to have an enterprise agreement in the EA so it becomes an effective mechanism. But yeah, contact the IEU in the first instance, and then we'll come out and start that engagement with getting a consultative committee up and running in your school.